Greetings, guitar engineers. I'm Desi Cerna, and in this video and podcast episode, we have part 3 of my Q&A. Recently, I sent out an email. I said, hey, I want to do like a Q&A session for my next video and podcast episode. Send me your questions. I got all sorts of great questions. You might want to look back to the part 1 and part 2. I've got a video, and then I also stripped the audio out, and you can hear that in my audio podcast as well. If you are listening to my audio podcast, I want to remind you that you can also watch my videos. Go over to YouTube, search for Desi Cerna Guitar, and you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. And if you're watching my YouTube channel, I have one of the most popular guitar podcasts on iTunes. So go to iTunes or Stitcher or Google Play or wherever you listen to podcasts and just search Guitar Music Theory or Desi Cerna. Or you could just search guitar, and my podcast should be one of the first ones that comes up. You can subscribe to my audio-only podcast, which is great for listening on the go. Sometimes I post stuff that's different on my podcast, and sometimes stuff is different on the YouTube channel because of the difference in formats. Anyway, let's dive right into the questions, and let's keep going. Here it is, Q&A, part 3. We're going to pick up with a question here from David. He says, I have been working 1-4-5 chord progressions in the key of E, and I play the triads across the fretboard. And his question is, how do you play triads with the rest of the scale? Can you explain how I would play minor triads and that sort of thing? Okay, yeah. So what you're talking about is the harmonized major scale. So you can take a major scale. I'll use the G major scale here, for example. And you can stack the notes, 1, 3, 5, and get a chord. And then you can go up the scale, stacking every other note as you kind of leapfrog your way, not leapfrog, but just as you go up the scale, and you get, and so on. You get what's called the harmonized major scale. It is one of the most important aspects of music and music theory, understanding how you stack the notes in the major scale to make triads and in turn chords and create that harmony. So if I'm in the G major scale, I'm going to take the first, third, and fifth note. It's G, B, and D. So G, B, and D makes a G major chord anywhere on the fretboard that I would play them. Then I would go to the next scale degree, A. I'm still in the G major scale here, but I'm gonna count it as 1, and I'll play 1, 3, 5 starting on A. So that's, in this case now, 1, 3, 5 is A, C, and E. Well, A, C, and E makes an A minor chord wherever I play them. And then you can follow that formula and go through the whole scale, and you get a sequence of major and minor chords. And that is the most important sequence of music. I teach this in Fretboard Theory, Chapter 6 at length. I walk you through it in the video, show you how you would play the triads, show you how you would play the chords, show you how you'd make chord progressions, all of this, show you how to transpose, show you how it relates to familiar songs. I got a bunch of resources so that you know how to apply it and make everything sink in. And then that idea becomes kind of foundational to everything else that you would continue to study in the Fretboard Theory system. Right? If you don't understand that idea, you're not going to understand modes or composition techniques or anything that follows. So that's how that works, David. And we are moving on. Ed says, in an improvised or maybe even a planned situation, what is a good thought process or map to follow to build a guitar solo? So a lot of the questions I've received here, people are curious about how certain things work or how guitar players know how things work. And there's my answer is similar to all these questions. It's an experience thing. So if you don't really have an idea of how to structure a solo, that kind of indicates to me that you haven't played many solos, right? You will learn how to structure a solo by learning solos. So before you start improvising your own solos, go out and learn how to play. a couple dozen solos that are within your ability, and look at how those solos are structured. So, for example, I've mentioned Stairway to Heaven many times in this Q&A session, some of the previous sections. So, Page starts down here in this position, right? And, later he comes up here. And it gets to a part where he's kind of he's slowly kind of building, and then he has this repetitive figure. He does which kind of adds intensity, right, to the solo. And then he comes up here and starts doing the, if I can remember it, right? I have forgotten it a little bit. And then he ends with, he tops it off with the, But anyway, there's a lot to learn from that solo just by looking at its structure, and you can get ideas of how you can develop a solo and add some intensity, and then come up here and end with the highest part of the solo is the very last note. So that's how you learn how to play solos. Learn a bunch of solos and look at how they are structured. All right, next question comes from Mandy. How do you achieve thumb independence when finger picking? Thumb independence. Well, I'm not sure exactly what you mean, so I'll just have to guess. Maybe you're talking about doing something like Suzy Q, where like your thumb is playing some steady quarter notes, and then your finger is going to pick a riff on top of it, right? So I'm just going to assume that's what you mean. How do you develop that technique? Well, first of all, you want to make sure that you are at a skill level where it's appropriate for you to be working on something like that. If you're still a beginner trying to get your basic skills together, then you shouldn't be starting with this. If you can't pick up your guitar and just kind of strum along with the song using basic chords in a simple strum pattern, if you can't do that, well, then you shouldn't be messing with something like this. But let's assume that you're beyond the basics. You have no trouble playing songs. You've got all those essential skills under your belt, and now you want to work on this finger picking technique. You have to see it written out. I actually have a free lesson for Suzy Q on the website. You have to see it written out, and you want to see like the notes that you're playing with your finger. How do they line up with the notes you're playing with your thumb? Are they together? Do you play them together? Or are they opposite one another? Do you do the finger first, then the thumb? Let's see. This is finger and thumb together, and then just the finger. And then here, the finger's first, and I hammer in, and then I hammer on, and the thumb lands with the index finger. So you have to go through the music, and you got to work that stuff out. You kind of have to think of it together as one thing. So instead of thinking about it as the thumb is doing one thing and the finger is doing another thing, you have to figure out how, in your mind, make it one thing, how things come together. Same with piano. It's not really an independence thing. It's understanding how it all works together, right? Now, with that said, once you understand how things all fit together and you get the feel for what it's like to pick a note with your finger and your thumb at the same time, or to pick a note with your finger first and then your thumb comes afterward, or pick a note with your thumb first and then the finger comes afterward. After you get used to that and what that feels like, then you can get to the point where you can have some more independence and you could just kind of freely improvise. I'm just playing quarter notes with the low E string with my thumb, and then I'll just kind of improvise with the E minor pentatonic scale. Okay? But in order to get to that point, you need to start with some simple things and you need to develop some of those skills that I mentioned earlier. I hope that helps. Let's move on. This question is from Ike. How do I connect scales to go up and down the neck? I think I know what you're talking about here, Ike, because I've received this question so much. And after working with people directly, I figured out what they meant, and I think this is what you meant. Some people learn the pentatonic scale patterns, and they know that this is pattern 1, and they know this is pattern 2, and they know this is pattern 3. But their question is, well, but how am I supposed to connect them? How am I supposed to start with pattern 1 and cover the whole neck and play everything in order and then come back and I've covered everything again? They're expecting to be able to start at one end of the scale and play all the way up the scale and the neck and come all the way back down. It doesn't work that way. You can't do that. That's not the way the fretboard works. On the piano, it works that way because it's very linear, right? You play left to right and right to left. On the guitar, however, you have occurrences of the very same pitch in different locations. For example, here's E, first string open. Here's the very same pitch, 5th fret, 2nd string. And here's that very same pitch, 3rd string. Very same pitch, 4th string. Very same pitch, 5th string. If I had 24 frets, I could play the very same pitch right here. So when you play scale patterns on the guitar, you play up the scale in one particular position. Then you have to move to another position, pick up with the scale, and then just kind of restart the scale in that particular position. So you go, that starts on E and ends on G. That's it. So I've gone up the scale, I could go down in that position. When I go to the next position, well, I'm all the way back here on G, which was the 2nd note in that first pattern. So that's where this position is going to begin. In this case, I can get all the way up to A in the scale, and I play from this G to that A. When I go up to the next position, well, now I'm backtracking. I'm all the way down to A, which was the 2nd note in the previous position, and I'll play up the scale. And I can get up to B here in this position. That's just how the fretboard works. And I am repeating notes. So when I play pattern 3, which starts on A, those very same notes were in pattern 2 once I get past the G. There's the G, and then there's the A. Very same notes. And those very same notes were back in pattern 1. There's the A. So if I start on A in pattern 1, or same notes. Same notes. Same notes. That's just the way the guitar works. The fretboard is like that. So in order to cover the whole fretboard, you learn how to play all the notes of E minor pentatonic in this position, then you go up to the next position. Learn how to touch on all those notes in this position, and you just go position to position. The higher you go, the higher you're starting in the scale, and the higher you can go, but you're repeating a lot of notes. And you cover the whole fretboard, and then you say, okay, I see the shapes and patterns that this scale makes in the fretboard, and then you move on to like learning songs to figure out how do players use that musically. And to practice, I just go up and down pattern 1. I move to the next position. I restart. I play up and down pattern 2. Move to the next position. I restart. Play up and down pattern 3, and so on. You're just mapping things out, getting used to the feel of those patterns. Then you move on to playing songs with the patterns. Okay. This question comes from George. He says, I have a Breedlove Legacy Concerto guitar. It's hard to play because the action is 1/4 of an inch at the 12th fret. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be able to play that. Looks like I'll have to sand the bridge saddle as I've already adjusted the truss rod. What height do you recommend at the 12th fret? Thanks, George. Okay, I'm not a guitar tech, so I bring my guitar to a guitar tech and I have them do the work on it and set everything up, except for maybe a basic truss rod adjustment here and there. So yeah, I'm going to recommend you take it to a good guitar tech. You know, I did a little research here. According to an article I found on Acoustic Guitar Magazine, this person says the average string action of the guitars I set up is 3/32 of an inch on the bass side and 1/16 inches on the treble side. Is that the 12th fret? But honestly, I don't know. That's not a strength of mine. I know how to restring guitars. I know how to make a basic adjustment to the truss rod if need be. You know, like if I can tell the action's getting way out of hand here, I have to change seasons or something, and I can tell that the wood has changed. But if I'm going to do anything major, I take my guitar to a guitar tech and do that. I don't even change my own pickups because I'm just too lazy, and I'm like, I don't want to go out and buy all those tools and do it. I don't know. Maybe one of these days I'll learn how to do that. But yeah, have somebody else take a look at it. That's what I would recommend. So sorry I can't help you out more than that. But I will say this. I'm glad that you are paying attention to the fact that guitars do need to be adjusted. So guitars should be easy to play. If they're not, 9 times out of 10, they will be easy to play if you get an experienced guitar tech to look at it and make some adjustments, okay? So if you have a guitar that doesn't play well, before you throw it out or go replace it with something else, get it set up. You might be surprised. I've had many students who complained about a guitar being too tough to play and they didn't like it and they wanted to replace it. But I said, don't replace it. Go find a guitar tech in your area, have them do some work on it. And I think almost every time the student came back to me and said, you were right, it plays like butter now and I love it. So do some work on your guitars. It should be easy to play. If you're at that stage where you're starting to move around and play bar chords around the fretboard and stuff, make darn sure that your guitar is set up with the action as low as possible to make it as easy as possible for you to play around the fretboard, because you're going to struggle enough learning new chord shapes and playing bar chords. If your action is just a little bit too high, it makes things much tougher. Even an experienced player like me would have issues playing on a guitar if the action, the string height, is too high. So everyone should have their guitars looked at and make sure they're as easy as possible to play. Moving on. Brian says, why do we have natural half steps between B and C and E and F? Is it just because that's what we've all become accustomed to in Western music, or is there some other element of our system of music that dictates they need to exist? So the first chapter in my fretboard theory series, I just go over some basic notes on the fretboard that you need to know before we can begin talking about theory and move on. And you can actually sample that first part for free. I show you how to learn the notes on the 6th string and the 5th string, and then how you can trace notes on other strings using octave shapes. And I explain sharps and flats and that basic thing. And I talk about why some notes are half steps, right? E to F is a half step. B to C is a half step, which is 1 fret. Everything else is a whole step, 2 frets. All the notes, right? And if I have my music history correct here, I believe this is how it happened, that back in the day, they had created, keyboards, pianos, that could play one particular scale. I don't know if they started with the minor scale, and that's why it starts on A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. And this is all based on physics, and you can go learn, Pythagorean or, whoever is the first one to kind of discover this and make sense of it scientifically and mathematically. There's certain frequencies that, have pleasing harmony and work together. So they've worked this all out, right, on the first piano, and they thought, this is great. We can play these notes, and we have this great scale. And we can stack the notes and we can create this great harmony, right? And it's wonderful. The trouble is you can only play in one key, right? So you couldn't just simply say, well, let's not start on this key. Let's go over one more key. You couldn't play the same scale and the same harmony because the whole structure of the notes, the frequencies, they weren't structured right. If you were going to start on a different pitch and you wanted to play that same scale and the same chords, you needed some frequencies in between the ones that were on the keyboard. So that's where the black keys came from. So they thought, well, we're going to need a pitch in between these two keys in order to get the scale and the chords right if we begin here. All right, so we'll add it there. All right, well, what if we start on this key, but we want to create that same sound of a scale, same harmony? Well, in that case, you're missing some frequencies. You'd have to add one in between this key, and so on. That's where the black keys come on the piano. It's to fill in those gaps so that you could start on any one of the notes and you have the frequencies necessary to follow that major scale step formula and create that scale and create the harmonized scale and the triads, and you could play in any key. And so the way it worked out is that they had to put half steps in between C and D, D and E, and so on, but they didn't need to do it between B and C or E and F, and that's why there are no black keys between those notes on the piano. And then the guitar, which is laid out differently, but we follow the same note convention and everything. So in music, regardless of what instrument you're playing, B and C and E and F are always a half step apart. Everything else has something in between. Moving on, next question. David says, I play pentatonic leads and would like to play in different styles in local jam bands. How do I get the twang of country or the mellow of the blues and the mystery of Jerry Garcia? Is there a source which can give me hints as to what riffs to play, how to set my pedals, and to play on both acoustic and electric guitar? There is a source, and the source is, get ready for it. Let's all say it together. Learn songs. Yeah, you got to learn songs. So if you want to learn how to play in the style of Jerry Garcia, you got to learn some Jerry Garcia songs, right? So I learned how to play, if I can remember it, Touch of Grey, right? In the chorus, there's a cool guitar riff, if I can remember it. All right, I don't know if I'm playing that correctly or not. It's very similar to that. So yeah, I learned that song. I actually played that song in a band, and it's got a really cool solo, which was different. And Garcia had kind of a distinct style, and it's not your typical minor pentatonic bend stuff. If I can remember it, let's see if I can remember it. Okay, so I'm kind of playing that partially like Garcia and partially my own style. I remember I learned this years ago because I had to learn it for a band. And I spent a lot of time listening carefully to it and working it out by ear and then trying to make sense of it. And of course, it all makes complete sense now. I'll talk about that in a second. It's very similar, but I kind of took a little liberty here and there and just kind of phrased things that either were more comfortable for me to play, or there were some times when I just, I don't know, I performed this song many, many, many times, and just sometimes you learn a solo note for note, but as you go out and perform it, you may, even without knowing, make some changes over time, So that's not a note for note replication of the Garcia solo, but it's certainly close enough that if you're familiar with that song, you know what I'm playing. And if you're familiar with Garcia's style, you're like, you are playing in the style of Jerry Garcia, and he's actually following the chord changes with some related scale tones and arpeggio patterns. I could literally strum the chords up here and go. And that's what the lead line is based out of. Right there. Look at that chord shape. Do an E. Yeah, cool stuff. So anyway, you will learn how to play in styles by learning that. So if you want to sound like Garcia, learn some Garcia, analyze it, get to know what he was doing, and then do something similar when you're in your jam band. You want to learn how to play the twang and country? Go out and learn some country stuff, right? You have to build a vocabulary before you can improvise. And that involves first learning how to copy something from a song, analyze it, get to see figure out what scale it's in, how does it relate to the chords, how are you moving through the scale, learn several examples, and then you can say, okay, let me take those ideas now and let me see if I can improvise with them, right? But you have to have that vocabulary first, and the only way to get it is to learn stuff. So learn some country solos, learn some blues solos, learn some Garcia stuff. You asked, how do I set my pedals? Well, for Garcia, you don't need much. I mean, a clean sound. He didn't really use many effects, although I used to do like Shakedown Street, and I think he used like an auto wah or something like that. But he really used a pretty clean, like a Fender Twin or something. Just crank it up and use a clean sound. But anyway, as you learn songs, pay attention to the sound. If you notice that, oh, this has some overdrive on it, then add overdrive. Or if you notice that, oh, David Gilmour, he's using reverbs and delays, you pay attention to the tone. If you want to know how to create a great lead sound using delay, for example, go out and learn a handful of great lead guitar solos that use delay. Take a look at the delay settings, figure out how to set your delay pedal in a similar manner. That's how you do it. Repertoire. We're moving on. Adam asks, he says, my question is, in your experience, how long should someone work on practicing a piece of music before moving on? Getting that last 20% towards 100% perfection is tough. Is it better to replace it with a new piece for the sake of variety? Yes. Yeah, it is. So 100% perfection, you will continue to refine your playing skills over time as you play guitar. You can't, if you have a limited amount of playing experience and you're learning, some of your first songs, you're not really going to be able to perfect those and play like someone and sound like someone who's a veteran player who's played thousands of songs over decades. You know what I mean? The only way to sound like someone who's played thousands of songs over the course of decades is to play thousands of songs over the course of decades. So, you learn something, you learn how to play it as well as you can play it at that time. And that does involve, some practicing. If there's some parts that are tripping you up or something, try to smooth those out. If there's a new technique or something, you can work on practicing it. But at some point, you got to say, this is the best I can do right now. I've made some progress, and this is great. I'm going to move on, right? And you can come back to songs over time, and maybe, you come back to them over time, and you realize that you can play them better because your playing skills have improved while you were working on other things. Or sometimes you come back to a song over time and you're like, my playing skills have improved. Now I'm ready to take a closer look at some of the techniques in this song that were too difficult for me initially, but here it is now 6 months later or something, and I can handle it now. So yeah, don't let yourself get stuck or caught up. If you find that you're not able to make progress with something, then that's okay. Move on. Move on to something else for variety, and because that's the only way that's the only way you're going to be able to progress. You got to move on, right? You will perfect your playing over time as you learn more songs and play more. It's a refinement process over time. I hope that makes sense. We are moving on. Nicholas says, I am looking for a description of the caged system, showing all 5 locations for each of the keys through the scale. Most explanations only show a single chord description or key position. Yeah, so Nicholas, the cage system is the natural way that chord shapes are built on the fretboard, and that includes arpeggios, and then you can play scale patterns that fit together with those chord shapes and arpeggios in different positions and in different keys, and then you can break those chord shapes and arpeggios down into different chord voicings and inversions, and we use different chord fragments and stuff when we play songs. So there's a lot to it. It's a big part of guitar playing, and it's applied in many different ways. It's not something where I can give you a simple explanation and boom, you know it. So in my fretboard theory system, I first introduced the cage system in chapter 3. We talk about the 5 basic chord forms, how you would move them around the fretboard and play them as bar chords, how you would play each shape as an arpeggio pattern, how you can then break up those arpeggios into different fragmented pieces of chords, and then how those are used in popular songs, how you would use it in Stairway to Heaven or Jack and Diane like I just played, or many other songs. I reference lots of songs, and if you get the video version, I demonstrate that and offer some resources to help you put together some of those song parts so you can begin using those caged chord forms, which you're probably already doing. If you're playing popular songs, you're using the caged forms already, whether you realize it or not. But then as you continue to progress in the fretboard theory system, caged is kind of, part of what's used all along. So when you start getting into playing over chord progressions and improvising with scales or modes or whatever, frequently I'm going to come back and, caged is mixed in there somehow. In Fretboard Theory Volume 2, when we get into like chord tone soloing or pedal tones and that sort of thing, again, your understanding of those caged chord forms plays into all of those things. So I would say, instead of looking for one simple explanation that's going to somehow magically make you understand the whole concept, it's something you have to work with over time and see all the different ways that it gets used. And you can get started with it in Fretboard Theory Chapter 3, and then it's going to resurface in other chapters as you continue in that system, and you're going to learn exactly how it's used in familiar songs. Okay, we are moving on. Terry says, I have been playing for a long time, but still marvel at what some guitar players can do when they are playing all over the neck. So my question is, what are they thinking when they do it? For example, are they thinking, I'll go up to the 5th fret and play some licks in A minor pentatonic, or I'll now slide down to something that will be centered on the 4th tone of the key? And then he says this, please don't say it's just feel and experience. I think there is more going on in the brain than that. When you are in the midst of a lead solo, what are you thinking about? What are you thinking about? I think understanding the mental part is key to improving. Okay, well, you are right. There is a mental aspect to it. We have to have some idea of what we're doing in our mind, right? Even the most talented players who claim that they don't know any theory and they don't know what they're doing, are full of crap. They know exactly what they're doing. That's why they can do it. What they just don't. They may not necessarily know how to put it into words and describe it to you because they're not a teacher, right? That's not their gifting. But they certainly know what they're doing. They are familiar with the fretboard. They have mapped things out in a manner that makes sense to them. They understand what they're doing. So you said, please don't tell me that it's a matter of feel and experience. Well, I mean, you're answering your own question there, Terry. It absolutely is a matter of experience. So I have talked about this in all of my recent Q&A podcast episodes and YouTube videos. Many of the questions that people are asking involve experience. So if you learn a bunch of guitar solos and you learn them as close as you are able to the recordings, and then you analyze them, that's the mental part, and you look at the scale patterns that they're using, how they move from position to position, the articulations like the slides and the bends and the hammer-ons and the pull-offs, how it relates to the chords. The more you do this, the more you start to see the patterns that people follow, not scale patterns, the plan or that people follow. I'm trying to think of something that a word different than pattern. You start to see the way that people compose solos. A lot of similar things keep coming up even between different players. Like, so this guy is bending this note in the scale pattern. He's bending from the flat seventh to the tonic. Yeah. Oh, that's what Jimmy Page does in Stairway to Heaven or whatever. And you see it come up in other solos and other keys. Well, after you come across certain things, a handful of times, you start to pick up on that. Like, oh, this is a really popular note that people bend, or this is a really popular way that people would descend a scale, or this is a really popular way that someone would slide up into a new position, or this is a real common way that people would outline this particular chord progression. So you begin to pick up on this stuff with experience as you learn these songs. If you're not learning the songs, how would you expect yourself to understand this, right? Imagine if someone said, I don't understand how basic chords are used to play songs. And they said, but I don't want to learn how to play songs. So can I understand how basic chords are used to play songs, but I don't want to play any songs? Well, of course not. Okay. So if you want to understand how solos are composed and what players typically do and what's going through their mind, you've got to learn solos. And then you'll get an idea of what they were thinking about, and then you'll have to somehow file that stuff away in a manner that makes sense to you. So I played in bands for years, and even prior to that, even when I was just learning, I was always learning tons of songs and parts from songs, and I would always try to understand it. So if I learned, a song, I would always want to try to figure out what scale pattern is this in, and if I was just learning the solo, I would still learn the chords. What are the chords? And so I could remember, okay, so this scale pattern goes with this chord, right? I would always try to make those connections. I would take a moment to look at the fretboard and say, okay, well, I'm in this key, and I'm at this fret, and I'm in this pattern, and then when I go to the next part of the solo, I shift up into this position. Oh, I see, I'm in this pattern now, and there's a chord underneath my fingers. I'm not using that chord in the solo, but I'm still going to think about it because I want to make that connection. I want to know that these licks can go with this chord shape and this position, and so on. I would always analyze it and have some sort of understanding as opposed to just memorizing the fret numbers and having no idea what I was doing. It is absolutely an experience thing. So if you're struggling to learn how to move around the neck and improvise and do that sort of thing, don't do that. Back up, learn a bunch of songs that move around the neck, figure out what they're doing. We are moving on. Robert asks, I am wondering if you recommend singing your scales, arpeggios, lead lines, and chord notes as you practice them. And if so, what do you sing? Do you oh, I think you're talking about solfege. Do, re, mi. Do you do do, re, mi, that sort of thing? I don't. I never have. I never sang my notes. I played guitar for several years. I started when I was a teenager, and then I started playing like in bars and stuff when I would have needed to be at least 21. And when I joined my first band, it's kind of funny. I got some musicians together. We had decided upon some songs. I learned the songs. I knew the songs inside and out. I was a good player at the time. We show up. We had a guy who's going to sing. And when we got started, I realized that because we were playing kind of, popular songs, and we were going to go try to play the popular clubs and stuff and get the good gigs, But I realized that we had one singer, but popular music is loaded with vocals and background vocals and harmonies. And so he kind of looked and he said, "Guys, I'm just one guy. So who's got the backups? Who's singing the harmony and the chorus and everything?" And I was like, "Huh?" Like I thought I had everything planned out because I knew all the guitar parts. And I never thought about everything else, all the vocal parts that were needed. Anyway, those first several years when I was playing guitar, I don't know what it was. Like I just totally blocked out the vocals. I just narrowed in the guitar parts, and all I thought about was the guitar parts. I didn't think about the vocals. I didn't sing notes. I was just listening with my ear, trying to find those notes on the fretboard. This is back before we had the internet and everything. Learning songs, and I never sang scales. I never sang. It wasn't until I played in a band that I started to realize, oh crap, if we want to be a band, someone's got to learn how to sing backups and stuff. Went and signed myself up for some vocal lessons, worked really hard on that because I was a terrible singer. I had no idea what I was doing. But I got good enough that I could be the backup guy. I learned harmony. I would use my guitar to work out, what does it sound like if you're in, the key of C, and if you sing the third, right? Or the fourth. So I started to work on singing harmony, and that was a great music education. And I got obsessed with it, actually. So I got real serious with some vocal lessons and learning how to sing in harmony. And then I used to sing all the harmony in the band, and I used to kind of oversee some of the vocal rehearsals and help. I would work the harmonies out on the fretboard, So if we're doing, let's see if I can give you an example. So if you're doing something like Kool and the Gang, Celebration, right? Lots of vocals needed on that. And you got to play songs like that if you wanted to get the good gigs, the wedding gigs, the big, great dance clubs, the corporate stuff. You had to learn that stuff that was rich with harmony and vocals. So I would actually listen to the songs, work out the parts on the guitar, and then I would learn how to sing the notes, and then we'd have practice sessions, and I would say, okay, so who's singing this one? They go, okay, I'll get this. I'll get that, and now we need this note. And we went through, and that's the first time that I really started to sing stuff that I was playing. So here's the deal. If you want to sing stuff while you're playing, you can, and you like doing that, and it works for you, go ahead and do it. But if you're just working on trying to learn how to play guitar, you don't need to do that, And even though there is some benefit to it, it might be counterproductive if you're in a phase where you're trying to actually just get your basic playing skills in order, right? If you're just trying to learn how to do stuff like, play songs, there's no reason why you have to sing what you're playing and add that to it. There just isn't. I'm not saying there couldn't be some benefit to it. There could be. There could also be a benefit if you sang and you played it and you made yourself, walk a tightrope at the same time, huh? Because you'd be working on your balance too, right? Well, do you need to work on your balance while you're trying to play guitar? No, you don't need to. Do you need to sing everything you play in guitar? Nope. You don't need to. I didn't until later. So I would say don't let something like that get in your way. If you're just trying to learn how to play guitar, just play guitar. Learn how to play the scales, see how they're mapped out on the fretboard, get a feel for playing them, then move on and start learning songs that use those scales and just put the songs on and learn how to play along with them and learn the parts of the song. We are moving on, and let's see, we got a lengthy email here from Nick. He says, I've heard a lot over the years about guitar coaches as opposed to guitar teachers. In my mind, the difference is pretty clear. A coach tells you exactly where you need to improve, gives you exercises to get you there, watches you closely, suggests improvements, rinse and repeat, yada, yada, yada. A teacher says, you should learn the major scale. Let me write it out for you, then sends you on your way to go practice it. So my question is, he says, how do I find a true guitar coach? So apparently he's had some different teachers over time, and he's been a little frustrated with his progress with them. And he's asking specifically about my Skype lessons. So I do offer lessons on Skype. We can connect, face-to-face using video, and I give lessons that way. It works really well, by the way. If you've never done that and you thought, can you really take guitar lessons over Skype? Yeah, you can. I was reluctant to do it for a while when people requested it. I'm like, no, I don't think that would work well. Then I started doing it, and I'm like, this is fantastic. So yeah, I do offer Skype lessons, and I do consider myself to be a coach. Nick, like you are describing, I will take a look at your playing, figure out what your goals are, and see if there is some specific instruction that I can give you to help you correct some mistakes or to help you make some progress. That's what I aim to do with each student, is kind of evaluate their playing and their playing goals and figure out how to get them there. 9 times out of 10, I do this. I do something very similar with all my students, and it's that I tell them, you got to back up. Most people have they're trying to get ahead of themselves. They're saying, I'm really struggling with this David Gilmour solo. I don't understand. My rhythm's terrible. I'm missing strings when I pick. My bends are out of tune. And so I will evaluate their playing, and I discover that they couldn't play along with a Green Day song using power chords because they decided that they were not going to learn how to play songs. They were going to jump straight to a David Gilmour solo. And they don't have any of the musical skills needed to put together a solo and play it. And so I have to tell them, forget about David Gilmour, back up, let's learn how to play complete songs. Let's work on your rhythm skills, your musical skills. You got to understand how to follow a song and stay in time like you're part of the band. You got to understand some basic strum patterns, yada, yada, yada. It's slightly different for every student depending on what level they're at, but 9 times out of 10, the main issue is people have gotten ahead of themselves. There's too many gaps in their playing. They're struggling because they're trying to do something and they don't have the skills to do it. And because and they don't know what skills to do it. So, you can waste a lot of time on your own and struggle with stuff, or you can find a good coach, like me, and we can sit down and we can talk it down and I can tell you what you need to do. I'll say you need to back up. Here's where you need to back up to, and here are the skills you need to work on. Let's spend some time with that for a while. And once you refine those skills, then you can come back to what you left off with, and you'll be much more prepared to work on that. So, yeah, Nick, you can schedule a Skype lesson, and I'll include that link when I send out an email broadcast about this podcast and video, and we can talk. And with Skype lessons, you don't have to commit to weekly or monthly or anything like that. You can book them. You just book them one at a time, as needed. And, we could have one session, talk about some things. I can give you some instruction and get you on the right track. And I might not see you for a couple of months, and I am okay with that. Or maybe you take every week for a couple of weeks, and that's it, whatever. It's all about whatever frequency is best for you. So we are moving on. Charlie says, most people would say that for acoustic guitars, the top is most important. A PhD for Rainsong, which is a guitar manufacturer, wrote the top provides 99% of the sound, but people still talk about the warm sounds of mahogany back, the sides, the warm sounds of mahogany back and sides, or the treble brightness of redwood. Does the tone wood of the back and sides really make much difference? Okay, we're talking about acoustic guitars. Here's my acoustic guitar here. So this guy's shopping around for a guitar, and he's reading some articles, and is talking about, well, you know, if you have a spruce top or a maple top, or if you have mahogany back and sides, or if you have, you know, some other type of wood, it's going to, does it really make a difference? Does it really change the sound? So I decided to call up my buddy John Scott at Bluesman Vintage Guitars. Bluesman Vintage Guitars made this Stratocaster for me, which is one of my most favorite guitars I've ever had in my whole life. And so he manufactures guitars there, and he does guitar repairs and restoration, and he's just a guitar expert, and I'm fortunate to live literally 5 minutes from that shop. Go back to my one of the previous questions about guitar setup and how I said I don't really get too heavy into guitar work, because I live 5 minutes from Bluesman Vintage Guitars, so I can take my stuff over to John Scott or the guys that work for him, and I can have experts who work on guitars for pro players take care of my guitars. Isn't that pretty cool? So anyway, I called up John. I'm like, John, how would you answer this question? Does the top and the back and the sides make a difference? And so we spoke for a few minutes, and I wrote down some notes here. And basically what John said is, yes, it absolutely does make a difference. He said, and this is the reason why guitars that all have the same top don't always sound the same. If the back and sides didn't make a difference, if everything was the top, then any guitar you picked up with a spruce top, if it was the same size and shape guitar, would sound the same, but he says they don't. And as an example, he mentioned a D18, which has a mahogany back and sides, sounds different from a D28, which has rosewood back and sides. But I believe they both have spruce tops. And then he said that a D28 with Indian rosewood will sound different than a D28 with Brazilian rosewood. So, you know, the top does make a big difference. It is he would at least agree that it's one of the major players in the tone of the instrument, but he said that the reasons why they make guitars with different woods on the back and sides is because they do change the sound, and some players prefer that, and that's why there are different model names for that. And he said even laminated backs and sides will sound different than solid wood backs and sides. And if you have any more questions, contact John Scott at Bluesman Vintage Guitars. He's my go-to guy for any sort of technical question like that. He builds a lot of like Stratocaster and Telecaster type guitars and Fender style basses, and does a lot of work for the stars. Let's move on, shall we? Ryan says, why are there so many different pentatonic scale positions, and why should we learn them all? What limitations are there to a player if we only learn one or two positions before attempting to learn other scales, such as the major scale? Let me go back to my electric guitar here, which is none other than a Bluesman Vintage. It's a Stratocaster style guitar. He calls it the Sedan. And you can go to the Bluesman Vintage site, and you can click on the Sedan, and you can watch a video demo, and it's actually me in the demo playing this guitar. And I love it. And I got to be involved with John as he made this one, so he kind of manufactured it to some of my specifications, which was really cool. So the question is, what's the point, and why do you have to learn all the pentatonic scales? Do you have to learn them all? I mean, no, you don't have to learn them all. You could learn one pentatonic pattern and learn how to play some songs. That's a little bit of Born Under a Bad Sign by Cream. Or you could play I Shot the Sheriff by Eric Clapton. I'm thinking Cream Clapton, in that scale pattern. Or you could play, Smoke on the Water uses a lot of pentatonic notes. So, you could learn one pattern and make use of it. So why do we learn the other patterns? Well, it's good to understand how pentatonic notes, how they're located all over the fretboard, and that you can play the notes in different positions. Let's see, where am I here? Right? Or come up here to, I didn't want to do that. Maybe come down here to pattern 5, whatever. It's good to see how the notes are located all over the fretboard, and how the notes end up making kind of a unique pattern in different positions. And then you can go through and start learning pentatonic songs and riffs and stuff. And you're going to notice that some patterns and positions are very common, like pattern 1, very common. People use a lot of pattern 5 down here. Pattern 2. Pattern 3. Whoops. 4. There's certain positions that just get a lot of use by a lot of players. The reason why you want to learn all of them is so you just kind of understand how the scale works on the fretboard. So as you start learning pentatonic parts, you can fit it together with the pattern, so you can mentally keep track of what you're doing and understand what you're doing. And then also, I tell players, after you learn the pentatonic patterns, start learning songs. You do not have to use all positions and patterns all the time, or you don't have to use them at all if you don't want to. Over time, what you will likely end up doing is what every other player ends up doing, is that you will settle into those positions and patterns that you are most comfortable with. And the others you may not use much, or you may not use at all. I don't like to tell people what they should and shouldn't use, because everybody's hand is a little bit different. I don't want to tell people, you should play that in pentatonic pattern 1, don't play it in pattern 5, because sometimes I have students that say, I'm really struggling to play this in pattern 1, but my fingers play it so easily in pattern 5. And I say, oh, okay, then play it in pattern 5. I like it in pattern 1, but if that's not working for you and pattern 5 is, then pattern 5 is your pattern. As I have learned many song parts over the years, when I would learn riffs and solos from songs that I had to perform in bands, I would always try to put it in a position and a pattern that is, most comfortable for me. And sometimes I would see the players, I might see a live video of them playing it on YouTube. Sometimes I pull up a video so I can watch someone perform a song and get an idea. And sometimes I'm surprised, like, oh, he chose to play it in that position? And I was like, ooh, well, that just doesn't work, because if I'm in that position, I've got to bend with this finger, and that finger's, I bend much better with this finger. So anyway, the point is that sometimes I would struggle to play something if I played it in the same position or pattern that I saw somebody else play it in. But if I just make a simple adjustment and play the same notes in a different position and a slightly different pattern that requires a different fingering, all of a sudden it became easy for me. And you want to do that too. So you want to map out the whole pentatonic scale to get to know the fretboard, and so you see what your options are, so that you can move forward with your guitar playing and play to your strengths. I hope that makes sense. You don't have to learn all the patterns, but if you really want to get to the point where you can play comfortably around the fretboard and you want to understand what's happening in the music you listen to, you should start by at least having an idea of how all the patterns are played. And you might be surprised, by the way. There might be some patterns that you learn and you're like, you know what? I really like this pattern. I like the fingering. It's comfortable for me. I can play this better than another pattern. And so that becomes one of your go-to positions. All right. We're going to try to finish this up here. We're at the hour mark, but I'm going to keep going. Todd says, I am pretty familiar with the pentatonic shapes and have been playing lead over some tracks on YouTube that display notes on the fretboard in the mode appropriate for that chord progression. Though I try to be mindful of the progression, I end up just zoning out and playing mindlessly through the scale. To my ear, it sounds very nice, way better than just running the pentatonic scale, but is it doing me any good other than just getting my hands on the guitar? I'm aware of the mode and I'm playing the correct notes. Am I learning something? Okay, I think if I'm understanding what you're really getting at here, you are playing over jam tracks that you find on YouTube. By the way, for the rest of you, you can go to YouTube and you can type in E minor guitar backing track or G major guitar backing track, and you can find tons of tracks you can jam over. Or if you're trying to play a song and you want to learn, whatever, you're practicing the solos to Sweet Child of Mine, just go to YouTube and type in Sweet Child of Mine guitar backing track, and you can find all sorts of tracks. Sometimes they're quite good. Sometimes they don't sound great, but they're still very useful for jamming over. So it's a great thing to do. It's to practice, for learning, and it can also be just a lot of fun. Just put on a track and just play over it. So this guy, he's to the point where he can listen to a track and he can figure out the correct scales, and he can play his pentatonic and his major scales. And if it's a mode, he knows how to pick the right major scale pattern to fit that mode so he gets the right sound. But I think what he's saying is, so he's playing up and down the scale, and yeah, it fits, it's the right scale, but I think, Todd, what you're getting at is, but can I do more than that? How do I do more than that? And my answer should not surprise anyone. You got to learn some song parts. You have to learn how to use that scale musically. It's good to learn how to just play up and down a scale pattern over a piece of music. I teach that in fretboard theory. Initially, that's a good start. You can hear the harmony. You can hear how the scale fits. It's fun. It sounds good. You got these wonderful sounds coming from your fingers. But then at some point, it's like, okay, I can't just play up and down scale patterns. I need to be more musical and more expressive with it. I kind of need to, learn licks and phrases. And you do that by learning specific solos and stuff from songs. So if you're trying to play, over a Santana song and you know that it's using, A Dorian mode, Oye como va, something like that. But you don't want to just sound like you're going up and down scale patterns. Learn some of the licks and phrases from the song, right? Learn some of those specific parts, right? Whoops. There it is. Okay, I'm trying to remember some of the parts from there. Learn parts of the solo and look at how Santana phrases in that solo. Look at how he adds space, then he makes a statement, then he adds space. So if you're trying to learn how to play in Mixolydian mode, in the fretboard theory system, I reference so many songs. So when I say, hey, this song features a solo in Mixolydian mode, I intend for you to pull up that song and listen to it. And sure, the first step can be play along with that scale pattern just to hear how it fits in the music. That's great. But then the next step is, okay, let's take a look at specifically what, Santana or Eric Clapton or Jerry Garcia or whatever. Let's look specifically to see what they did with it to make it sound musical so it didn't sound like they were just playing up and down scales. So you got to spend time doing that, learning those solos, and then you start to see how to be more musical. I think that answers your question. We're moving on. Albert says, you mentioned the 5 positions of the major scale, pentatonic scale, and minor scales in various podcasts. Please elaborate on this. It's hard to wrap my head around this, especially since I think in terms of visualization of music charts and fretboard map. Well, I think I have elaborated on that in some of the previous questions. When you learn a scale, the notes are scattered all over the fretboard. So you learn how to cover one position at a time, and each position, the notes make a pattern in that different position. So I know if I'm in this position, this pattern touches on all the notes of G major in this position. But if I'm in, this position, that pattern is what's going to help me touch on all the notes of G major in this position. And you learn those patterns so that you can take the next step, which is learn how to play riffs and melodies and solos from songs. Look at how they use those scale patterns and how they play musically through there. And so you can familiarize yourself with the patterns. I teach them in fretboard theory. I show you how you can practice them connecting to music, and then I show you where you're going to hear those scale patterns used in specific songs. And in some cases, like if you get the video version, I got that resource section where I have a lot of things just linked, so you can pull up tabs and stuff like that really quickly. And a lot of times I'm just linking to like stuff on YouTube or free sites, but what I've done is collated that so that you don't have to go out and search the internet on your own and figure out, where to find these resources. I've got it all organized for you. So you've got my video instruction, you've got some of my images and stuff that I provide, and then I say, here's some great free stuff on the internet you can use, and look, I've organized it for you. Boom, here's a bunch of songs you can listen to that are in this mode, and here's some backing tracks and blah, 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 blah. Because you want to spend your time playing the guitar. You don't want to spend hours on end scouring the internet trying to find something to help you play guitar, right? Okay, we are moving on. Tim says that he needs to know how to perform bends better. So how do you get better at like the half-step bend, the quarter-step bend, full bends, yada, yada, yada? Well, Tim, you learn solos that use bends. That's what you do. So, for example, let's change sounds here. Let's say you're going to learn, well, first of all, make sure that you are at that stage where you're ready to start working on lead guitar techniques like this. Don't get ahead of yourself. Get your essential skills down. Do you know the basics? Do you know how to play songs using open chords, power chords, bar chords? You can play along with music, play complete songs, stay in time like you're part of the band, learn how to mute strings, control unwanted string noise, all that good stuff. If you've gotten to that point and you got a big repertoire of songs, and you can sit in with a band and play the basic rhythm guitar parts, and now you're ready to go to the next level and play lead, and you want to work on those bends. You take simple solos. A good one to learn is the first solo, To Comfortably Numb by Pink Floyd, right? So right there at the beginning of that solo, I'm in D. It starts with that half-step bend, F sharp to G and back. It's a bend. So you can practice that by fretting the notes so you can hear the pitch that you should be bending to. That was fretting it. Now I'll bend it. And I'm going to fret it again. I'm going to try to match that pitch. That's a half-step bend. A lot of repetition. And then the next note, you bend a D to an E. So you would want to fret that E note to hear what it sounds like. Now go to the bend and work towards hitting that note. There's the fretted note. There's the bend. Right? A lot of repetition. That's how you can practice. In that case, that was some half-step bends. and some whole step bends. You got to figure out, okay, what finger are you most comfortable using? I used my middle finger for that first bend, and my index finger is laying behind the strings to control unwanted string noise, and my right hand is laying on some of these wound strings here to control unwanted string noise. But when I go to the second string and bend the D to the E, I like to use my ring finger and my middle finger, the strength of both of those, to push that string up. Again, my index finger is laying behind. My right hand is involved with muting. And so you have to kind of work that sort of stuff out. You got to think about which finger or which combination of fingers give you the strength to push the string up and have control over it. Which finger is and which part of your hands are going to work on controlling the unwanted string noise? And then what pitch are you bending to? And can you fret that? And then practice bending to that pitch. That's how you practice bends. Let's move on here. This is a question from Gary that he asked me about. In Fretboard Theory Volume 2, I introduce the harmonic minor scale. Harmonic minor, right? And I write out the notes, and I explain that, well, you start with the natural minor scale. Here it is, here are the notes, and here are its chords. And then you would raise the seventh, and here's the natural minor. We're going to raise that seventh, and here are its notes, and here are its chords. But he was confused because he was like, whoa, wait a minute. When you raised that seventh, and then you wrote out the scale and the chords, you didn't do it right, because if we go through and reharmonize all the chords in the scale using that raised seventh, in this case G natural to G sharp, that changes the construction of all the chords, and you got to go through, and this is confusing, and you didn't explain this. Perhaps I didn't explain it well enough in the book, but here's the thing. When you use the harmonic minor scale, the harmonic minor usually is only used temporarily when you're playing the 5 chord in a minor key, which means if you're in A minor, the only time harmonic minor comes into play is when you go to the A minor's 5 chord, which is E minor, but instead of playing it as E minor, E, G, B, you play it as E major, E, G sharp, B. That's got that raised 7th in it, and it's only during that 5-7 chord when you would raise the 7th in the scale. And then when the music returns to A minor, you're back to natural minor. Okay? That's typically how the harmonic minor scale is used, and you need to understand that initially before you would even explore another possible way to use it. So you don't need to reharmonize the harmonic minor scale. You think about the natural minor scale, and then you think about when you would temporarily raise the 7th note over the 5 chord only. That's how the harmonic is used most of the time. There's a lot more to this. I go much more in depth in the Fretboard Theory series, and there's a lot of stuff that's taught prior to me introducing the harmonic minor scale that you need to understand, so that when you get to that point and we start using that scale and its application, if you want to understand that, you got to learn the stuff that comes before it. All right, we are moving on. My question is how to maintain better picking control and accuracy when picking through arpeggios. When I play songs like More Than a Feeling or Behind Blue Eyes and have arpeggiated intros, I tend to miss notes or stumble over the wrong strings, even at slow tempos. Maybe you cover this in your guitar picking mechanics course, which I just recently purchased, but I'm now just getting started on. So you're on the right track there. And I do talk about that in the course. So I've got a course, Guitar Picking Mechanics, where I get into various ways that you would pick through arpeggios, pick arpeggiated songs like More Than a Feeling, if I can even remember how that goes. So, and that's actually a good example, because you might think picking technique means how to shred really fast, right? Well, no, picking technique means anything that you're doing. And you, most players struggle with, they're not struggling with shredding. They're not even bothered. They're not even attempting to do that. They're just struggling with general playing in popular songs like More Than a Feeling by Boston, because you're hopping around string to string, you're arpeggiating the chords, and sometimes they're missing strings. So how do you improve that? I do talk about that in the picking mechanics course, and I don't think I mentioned this song, but I mentioned songs that are similar. So we take a look at your options, like, if you start with a downstroke, then you have to move to the next, do you move to the next string and do you play an upstroke, or do you use 2 downstrokes in a row, or when do you use an upstroke? And a lot of guitar players don't really think about that. They're usually just focused on their left hand, and then like their right hand's kind of like on autopilot and is trying to follow along. And sometimes, they get stuck or they stumble. So we have to think about the right hand. And sometimes with a little bit of thought and a little bit of practice, you can train yourself to pick things a little bit differently and overcome some stumbling blocks that you might have. So I would say keep working through the guitar picking mechanics course, and you will get to that, and then you might want to focus particularly on those chapters and sections where I talk about this style of picking. And for the rest of you, if you're thinking, oh, maybe I should get that course, hang on. You need to be well beyond the basics, and you need to be in what I would consider to be an intermediate level before you would study that, okay? You don't really want to focus on that level of picking until you're totally comfortable just playing a lot of basic songs, right? So, if you can move around the fretboard, and strum and play chords all around the fretboard and pick, simple riffs and solos and stuff, and you're totally comfortable with that, you can play along with music and stay in time with the music, then you would be ready for something like guitar picking mechanics, where you can take a closer look at your picking. But it's not a beginner course. It's something that's going to push you up into the upper levels of intermediate playing, and even to into the beginning levels of advanced playing. So you want to wait till you're at that level before you would take a look at that course. All right, we're moving on. I just got a few more questions, and I'm going to be done with this Q&A session, but it looks like all my pages didn't print, so I had to pull up the document on the computer here. The next question is, I would like to hear someone discuss connecting chords using guide tones or leading tones on progressions other than 1-4-5 standard progressions. So how to target the right notes if you're playing something other. I play the leading tones, chromatic, or neighboring tones, changes tension so that there's... He's talking about chromatic, passing tones. Well, in fretboard theory, I introduced the idea of outlining a chord progression using chord tone soloing. I talk about that in Fretboard Theory Volume 2. So this assumes that you already know scale patterns and you're comfortable using them to play song parts. You already know caged chord forms and caged arpeggio patterns, and you understand how that works. So now I'll show you how to use that so that you can play over progression, and instead of just playing up and down the scale, you're going to think about some of those chord arpeggio patterns that are underneath your fingers too, and you'll see which scale tones are actually chord tones by the way those patterns overlap, and you can touch on some some chord tones to tie your lead line more closely to the underlying chords. I talked about how Stairway to Heaven, introduces an F note to the A minor pentatonic scale because it perfectly ties that descending scale, boom, on an F, because there's an F chord underneath in the of the solo section. You hear it again with F. Have you ever wondered why he went down the pentatonic, and instead of doing that note, which is the pentatonic, Page plays an F instead, because he was using that chord tone from the underlying F. I talked about Comfortably Numb. Those are right out of the chords, D and A. Using chord tones and thinking about the arpeggio patterns. Whoops, and incorporating them into that solo. That's one of the reasons why Comfortably Numb is such a famous solo. It's so melodic because it connects so wonderfully with the chords. So I explain how all that works in Fretboard Theory Volume 2. Don't get ahead of yourself. You got to know scale patterns and arpeggios first. And I talk about how you would map out a 1-4 chord progression and follow that change. A 1-5, a 1-4-5, a 1 flat 7-4, a 1-5-6-4. I go through examples other than 1-4-5. I talk about working some of the minor chords in there. And if you understand that, I don't go through every possibility, but I go through enough that you get the idea and you can apply the same concept to any type of chord change. Now, as for your question about using chromatic stuff, I don't talk too much about that, other than when I teach the pentatonic scales, I explain that you can add in some chromatic passing tones. So instead of doing this, you can go, right? And I explain how some songs will add in some notes. Sometimes you'll put a chromatic note right there too. And I reference songs and that sort of thing. I talk about chromatic passing chords and stuff, but I don't get into like soloing techniques where players would start to learn how to play outside the box and do like chromatic stuff. You know, like, right? In that example, I just took an A major arpeggio and I started on the first note, but instead of playing the first note, I went 1/2 step above it, then 1/2 step below it, and then I played it. There's my A. Then I did the same thing for the major third. And the fifth. Root, third, fifth, root. Ah. Or sometimes players will do stuff like take the chord tones and go. I'm just taking that chord shape, and instead of going, I'm going next string, going down a 1/2 step. How about this? Right? Ah. Stuff like that. I don't really get into that in fretboard theory. And I don't recommend you get into that until you really understand everything that's in fretboard theory. And once you do, it's not hard to make that step. And you'd have to get into jazz and those sorts of styles to get into the details of how players might use chromaticism. You don't hear as much of it in kind of more popular styles, other than like the blues scale and some occasional stuff. But you'll get introduced to that as you learn songs. You know, so when you follow the list of the pentatonic scale songs that I give you, and you learn some of those riffs, you're going to get introduced to a couple examples where you have some chromatic movement in there, and that's really how you're going to learn it, and what's going to, how it helps it stick. That's how I learned it. When I think chromatic movement, I think stuff like, manic depression, right? I got introduced to, no, and I knew it was chromatic because I figured out, well, it's not on the chord, it's not on the scale, but it's coming from one scale tone to the next or one chord tone to the next, and I realized, oh, that's chromatic movement. And I learned that from the songs instead of trying to figure it out on the fretboard like on my own. I think that sort of thing, you need to allow yourself to get introduced to it in songs. So perhaps if you were focusing on learning songs more and learning lead lines from songs, you would better understand how that works into things. Okay, moving on, and I gotta look at the screen here. I would like to ask, what is the key and chord progression to the Scorpion song Holiday? It seems to move around a bit and confuse me. Can you explain it? I'm not familiar with the song, but I actually did take a look at it when I initially got the email, and it's doing this sort of thing with a D minor chord, and then something like that, right? So think about a D minor, and then the bass note is D. I'm gonna have to refinger this because the bass note's gonna move down to C. And then the bass note's gonna have to move down to B flat. It's going down the scale, so I gotta refinger this. Which also coincidentally is a B flat major 7, and then goes to like an A major or A sus or A7. This is simply the key of D minor, going down the scale, getting to the 5th of D minor, and instead of playing A minor, which is what would naturally be in the D minor scale, you play A major or A dominant 7, which has a major 3rd, and that's D harmonic minor. That's what's happening there. So you have, you have some D harmonic minor temporarily while you're on the A, and then when it goes back to D, you're in D natural and D natural minor, and D natural minor has a C in it. But A major has a C sharp in it. But you only play that C sharp over the A7 chord. That's usually how it works. I'm not familiar with the rest of the song. If there's other elements to it, I'm not sure, but that gets you started. Final question here, people. Luke says, you mentioned the best way to learn is to learn actual songs. My question is, what is the best way to learn songs? There's tons online, but not sure if it's the best way to learn to actually perform them. Would you recommend songbooks? Okay, first of all, if you're a beginner and you're just learning your first songs, you really need some help, right? Because you don't know what you're doing, and you don't want to waste your time, and you don't want to be searching for stuff, and you don't want to work on something that you shouldn't be working on and get stuck and frustrated and think you can't play guitar and quit. So if you can find a good teacher, find a good teacher that can help you in that beginning stage. And, tell them, say, look, I've learned the basics. I know chords and scales. I really just want to learn songs, simple songs. Can you show me how to play 30 songs that are easy songs that I could easily strum along with and just use very, very basic techniques? If you can't find someone like that, you can connect with me on Skype. I help a lot of students with that. Or I actually have courses, and I'll include some links to courses in the email when I send out a broadcast about this YouTube video and podcast, where I give you steps that you can follow and show you exactly what you can do. I make song recommendations. I point you to the resources that you need, show you how to practice and that sort of thing. So you can do it for you. That way, I've got it all planned out for you based on my experience as not only a player, but a teacher for decades. So you can just focus on doing it and playing and improving your skills and making music. And you don't have to wonder what you should be doing. You don't have to worry about getting ahead of yourself. You don't have to spend countless hours scouring the internet trying to find something. So if you're still in that beginner stage, that's what you want to do. If you're past that stage, you're like, I don't have any trouble, Desi, but now I'm ready to take things to the next level and I can learn on my own. I know how to read tab and stuff. What do you recommend? Currently, I think one of the best resources is Ultimate Guitar Tabs, and I actually have a paid account. And when you get the paid account, you get access to their professional tab files, which are actually the professionally transcribed tab files that must come from the same files that they used to sell in tab books. No need to get the tab books now because you can get access to those files online. It's the, professionally transcribed licensed stuff. You have to have a pro account for it because the Ultimate Guitar is paying out for that sort of thing. That's going to be your most accurate tabs. You can, choose different instruments and see Guitar 1, Guitar 2. They have an actual tab player, so you not only see the tab, but you can actually see it moving in real time, and you can start it and stop it and pause it and slow it down and loop it. They give you a backing track and a lot of great tools that can make learning that song very easy. Then you can just, if you pull up a copy of the song, listen to that. There's software to slow songs down. You can actually slow videos down if you find the song on YouTube. You go to the settings and player controls and you can slow it down. You can find backing tracks on YouTube. So it's not hard to find what you're looking for if you know what you're looking for. Trouble is, if you're still learning, you don't know what you're looking for. In that case, work with someone that can tell you what you need and can provide it for you so you can work on your playing. Well, that's what I do with a lot of my students, but my goal is to teach them how to teach themselves. So at some point, my students are like, I get it now. I know what I'm looking for now. I know, what to do. I don't keep my students in the dark on this stuff so they're dependent on me for the rest of their life. I want you to teach yourself. But when you're at a certain stage, you can't teach yourself. You shouldn't be teaching yourself. You could be wasting a lot of time. But anyway, when you're at that stage where you know what to do, I would recommend Ultimate Guitar, and I would get the paid version of it. It's not expensive, and the player controls are excellent for practice. I even use it myself sometimes. If you're still struggling with something, you can take a private lesson from me. So if you're working on something that's just advanced and you know what to do, but things aren't coming together and you're not sure why, or there's tools out there, but you're just not sure how to make the best use of them. You can take a lesson from me, and I can walk you through that, and I can put a plan together for you. So you save yourself the frustration, and you can get on with accomplishing your goal. Oh my gosh, people. So we are wrapping up now the third part of this Q&A session. I thought this might be one podcast and one video, but it's been 3 parts, and here we're well over an hour here in this third part, but I didn't want to have a 4th part. So we are wrapping it up. These were great questions. I did have others, but they were just all very similar, so some of them I didn't include because I basically already answered them. If you But this is great. I would love to continue to answer questions like this. So you are welcome to email me, desi@guitarmusictheory.com. You can comment on my podcast. You can comment on my, I wouldn't comment on the podcast because I don't know where you might be posting that. I would love if you're listening to the podcast, the audio podcast, please rate it and subscribe it and leave a nice review for me. I'd appreciate that. But I won't get a notification if you leave a comment on like iTunes or something like that. I do get notifications if you comment on my YouTube videos. So if you have a question or comment, you're welcome to post it there and I will see it. Or you can email me directly, desi@guitarmusictheory.com. And once I get enough questions to do this again, I would love to do this again. In the meantime, I'm Desi Cerna. The website is guitarmusictheory.com. If you're not on my email list and getting email notifications about all the wonderful things I have going on, head over to my website, answer the question I ask you about your playing, get enrolled in a free course, and you'll also get subscribed to my email list, and I'll keep you posted on everything that's going on. Wherever you are watching or listening to this, please subscribe, click like, leave me some positive comments. Then stay tuned for more. I don't normally do a Q&A session like this. I have the different things I do with different podcast episodes and YouTube videos. So lots of exciting stuff to come, especially in the new year here. So stay tuned for more.